Hi, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Risk, where our goal is to connect, engage, and inspire each other and build a global community of risk practitioners. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and today I'm super excited to welcome my guest, Jose Bohorquez, and we're going to have a conversation about software, cybersecurity, risk management, all these topics that are top of mind for all of you. And I'm really looking forward to that. Now, Jose is the president of CyberMed. Initially, he started a company called Boldtype, and it's a consulting company that provides services in the area of software development, cybersecurity. And he has, I believe, deep technical expertise with a PhD in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT. And of course, deep knowledge of regulatory requirements. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I hope you enjoy it too. Please continue to share your thoughts and comments in the chat. With that, Jose, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Naveen.
It's great, Jose. So I wanted to actually ask you something a little bit different because I noticed on your LinkedIn profile that you provide mentorship to digital health startups as part of the Endless Frontier Labs initiative. Tell us a little bit more about that and how it came about.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Mentorship has always been really important to me. I heard a quote from one of my mentors a long time ago. He said, when possible, try to borrow scar tissue. We're all going to learn from our mistakes, but it's definitely more efficient if you can learn from somebody else's mistakes. And a great way to do that is to have good mentors. So I've benefited tremendously from having great mentors in my life. And I try to pay it forward by providing mentorship to others where possible. And I got that opportunity with NYU. They have an excellent program. Anybody in the medical devices space should really check it out. It's not exclusively medical. They have a few other tracks, but their medical device digital health track is really excellent.
Okay, so we will share a link to that program in the show notes later on for people to take advantage of. I think this is a great opportunity for digital health startups to learn from each other and people like you. So thank you for doing the work that you're doing. So let's get into that. As you work with these startup companies or small to mid-sized companies who are trying to build a SAMD product, I was very curious. What has been your experience like? What is some of the top two or three issues you see them struggle with?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and we help companies that are doing SAMD or SIMD software in medical devices, particularly with startups. We just find that it's overwhelming if you don't have a lot of experience in the medical device software space. The amount of content that you have to understand. So there's dozens of guidance documents from FDA standards. Of course, there's a regulation piece of it. And just coming to understand all of that is challenging. And a result of not having a clear understanding of that is that startups will get surprises at the end. So we've had clients, for example, who come to us on the cybersecurity side of things, who submit their application to FDA for their 510K. And maybe at the time of submission is the first time they realize that there's a dozen cybersecurity documents that FDA expects you to submit with your application. And they've never even seen that before, right? So they're scrambling, trying to put something together, hack something together that's not good. And the agency is pretty savvy at this point. They're going to send you back a list of deficiencies, and it could really stall your launch by months or even longer. So I think that's one of the big challenges that companies in the medical device space have, particularly again when the team doesn't have a ton of experience.
Got you. So now, Jose, you have recently launched a new venture in the form of your CyberMed consulting, and you are focusing on cybersecurity. So I'm curious, what do you see again in the cybersecurity area as you work with these companies? Some of the top issues that they are facing.
Sure, yeah, and maybe just to give you a little bit of the history of that. So we've been around for 8 years, and one of my partners, Mohammed Fustak, who's just a brilliant software developer and architect and cybersecurity expert. So he was formerly the chief software architect at Motorola Solutions. So he was leading global software development projects where security was top of mind because it was communication systems for like police forces and security and that sort of thing. And he joined me. Well, we started the company together very early days. So he's been in the medical device world for about 8 years. And that skill set around cybersecurity was very helpful. It was always top of mind. But then in 2023, when FDA released the new cybersecurity guidance document following the FD&C Act, all of a sudden we realized that a lot of companies were going to struggle with this. And so we started offering that as an explicit service. So up until that point, we primarily focused on doing software development for our client. And at that point, we started providing cybersecurity consulting for our clients to help them just do all the work that has to be done. of the challenges, it's just you have to understand security very deeply, but then you also have to understand what FDA wants. And then you have to figure out how to incorporate that into your process. Cybersecurity is not something you want to try to just throw in at the last minute. Sometimes that's the situation you find yourself in, and we help companies in those situations. But ideally, you're thinking about security from the early stages when you're just setting up your architecture for your system. So yeah, the big challenges are just not knowing the whole flow and not understanding the nuances of, proper encryption or proper just how to navigate that.
Now, on this point, I recently came across a very insightful LinkedIn post from you where you are sharing a sort of a two-stage development model for both software and cybersecurity. I found that very interesting. Can you give us a very high-level view of what you're thinking there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we think of it as three stages, and there's blurry lines between them, of course. It's not perfectly sequential, but sometimes it helps to organize our thoughts like that. So the first one is that architecture and design phase. So that's where you're taking your design inputs. What does this software system need to do? And you're thinking like, how do we architect the software system to properly address those requirements and be robust? It's a step that sometimes people skip to their detriment, right? You really should start with architecture, and 62304, which is the key standard on the software development side, tells you that as well, that you really need to have an architecture document in place. In cybersecurity, you have like a whole other, like a subset of that, which are the security views in that system. But anyway, that's at the architecture phase. So it's generating those architecture views, performing threat modeling around that, evaluating that risk, right? So this is a podcast all about risk. And in threat modeling, you want to look at those various threats and vulnerabilities and understand like what each particular vulnerability, what the risk associated with it is, implement the right controls in place. And you might have to cycle through that a few times. And then once you're ready, that's the architecture phase. And then there's the implementation phase. So that's where you're taking your architecture and now you're coding, right? You're writing the software for it. And within that, one of the things that you're likely going to do is pull in either open source or third-party libraries that are just going to make your development process more efficient. Every software group does this. It doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel each time. But as you're pulling in outside software, you're pulling in those outside vulnerabilities as well. Now, the good news is that there's excellent national and global vulnerabilities databases where as people discover vulnerabilities with software, they share them with the community. So as you're pulling in those third-party libraries, you want to be evaluating them just to see if there's any significant vulnerabilities associated with them. And that ends up making part of what's called the software bill of materials, which is like the recipe of all the stuff that's in your software from third-party libraries. And then you would analyze that. And then you would, when you feel your software is ready, you would perform penetration and fuzz testing and various forms of cybersecurity testing. And so that's kind of like the activities, some of the activities that go into that implementation phase. And so then the third phase we look at is just now post-market, because you have responsibilities there as well. So after you've launched the product, there's a number of tasks that you're required to do to ensure that if there's any new vulnerabilities that you didn't catch or that arise because somebody found a new vulnerability in a third-party library that you're using, let's say, that you have a process in place to analyze that and then to, maybe update your software, send out a patch. You may need to communicate with stakeholders about this. So yeah, those are the three big phases of a project. And of course, there's back and forth between them. Sometimes you're in the implementation and you realize you have to update your architecture. Or you're post-market and you realize you got to come back. So yeah, but at a high level, that's.
And I was going to ask you because to me, it seems like there'll be a lot of iteration between these two phases, at least during the development phase. And then in the post-market also, you may have to go back to the drawing board. Now, Jose, this all sounds common sense to me, right? This is so structured, common sense. And I'm very curious to hear from your practical perspective, where is it? Where is it that people are struggling in the industry? Is it because we are in a rush to launch? Is it because we have a lot of pressure? Or you did mention that, we sometimes don't have the full knowledge and information, and maybe it's a knowledge issue, but is there something else that is holding us back? Can you share that with us?
Yeah, I think knowledge is part of it. I think some of this stuff is, it's simple from a high level. It's complicated once you get into the weeds. We just finished the project where it's a very simple system, and we uncovered about 70 plus different vulnerabilities associated with a device, which is that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with a device or the development of the device. This is just the nature of modern software development, where there's so many intricacies in so many
Mhm.
ways in which a threat actor can come in and do harm with your system. So there's just a lot of expertise that's required to know how to properly develop, architect, design a system and then analyze it and test it.
I got.
Yeah.
So it seems like you may not have all the skill sets and experiences needed especially in a startup or a small company environment. And that is where what I'm hearing you say is very critical for companies to sort of work collaboratively, whether, they go find help outside with agencies like yours. But it's important to be aware where the gaps are. So, Jose, we have an excellent question from Yusuf today, and he's basically asking that with so much focus on integrating cybersecurity across the total product lifecycle and SAMD, what do you consider best practices for implementing a secure by design approach from the early stages of development? So let's tackle that part first. What is secure by design? And I know as FDA has come up with a secure product development framework, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so that ties back into what we were mentioning earlier, which is this notion that you don't want to try to tack on security at the end. That's a mistake, because, well, in part just for practical and business reasons, once you get to that point, if you discover there's a significant architectural type of deficiency in your system, now you got to go back to the drawing board. You got to go
Mhm.
re-architect your system, redesign, retest, re-everything. So you want to avoid it for business reasons, but also it's just not going to be a secure, with software development, it's sophisticated systems where you get a ripple effect. It's almost like a butterfly effect, where small poor decisions early carry on to just
Mhm.
larger implications down the line. So security by design means that you're incorporating security thinking and process from the earliest stages. So what does that mean? It means architecture, for example. So when you have your design inputs, usually you start by saying, okay, what is the intended use of this device? What is it supposed to be doing? And you're going to have some design input, some requirements for the software associated with that. And then you might architect the system primarily based on those requirements. But then you're going to analyze the architecture and say, okay, where are there threats and vulnerabilities? So as an
Mhm.
example, if you've got a device that connects through Bluetooth to a mobile app, okay, if I think the person asking the question asked about Stride.
Mhm.
Is there a way to spoof the system? Is there a way to tamper with the system? Is there a way to extract information from it? What are and the answer is always like most of the time it's yes. Like there's ways to do each of those things. It's like, okay, well now what is the risk associated with it? What is the exploitability of that
Mhm.
vulnerability? Meaning, can somebody do it? There's a difference if somebody can exploit a vulnerability from the other side of the world and they can do it in a way that it affects every single one of your device users versus a vulnerability that requires a threat actor to be in the same room with the device
Mhm.
and they can only impact one device at a time. There's a difference between those two, right? Obviously, if a single person can take down all of your devices through one attack, that's
Mhm.
substantially more exploitable than if they need physical or local type of interaction with the device. So it's from the earliest stages, thinking through those vulnerabilities, those
Mhm.
different attack vectors, and then considering how critical those are, and then controlling for them early.
Mhm.
So
Gotcha.
really starting early. And then again, through every phase of development, there's a very nice alignment between what you should be doing for like 62304 software development lifecycle and what you should be doing for cybersecurity, where you're doing planning and then you're doing architecture and then you're doing design and then you're doing verification, and there's kind of a parallel that goes with each one of those
Mhm.
related to cybersecurity that you should be following.
Nice, nice. So, guys, if you're just joining us now, I'm having a conversation with my guest, Jose Bohorquez, today. And we are talking about different questions, topics, challenges related to software development and cybersecurity. So, please share your thoughts and comments as well in the chat. This is a conversation, not a webinar or a lecture. And I believe all of you have perspectives and insights to share. So, let's share and learn from each other. So, Jose, what you have just described to me is a very similar concept for safety by design. We always say the same thing: start early, consider all the hazardous situations, sequence of events, whatnot, and consider where the risk might come from. This conceptual framework to me seems no different than safety by design. So, help us understand how these two kind of approaches are sort of interconnected with each other, because at the end of the day we want our device to be both safe and effective. That is the ultimate line in the sand that we have to pass, right? So
Yeah.
help us understand how these two approaches can be integrated together so that people don't get a sense that we have to do more. We are not doing more work. We are doing the same work, but we are applying a conceptual framework that is integrated enough. Help us
Sure.
understand that a little bit.
Yeah, no, happy to. And it's interesting. You're right. There's a lot of similarities, but the reason that FDA has sort of isolated cybersecurity is that they recognize there's also some differences. So I'll give you one example, and I almost think there's really three different categories of risk that are very similar but a little different enough where you think of them differently. So one of them is normal safety risk, sort of ISO 14971 type of risk.
Mhm.
Second one is usability, right? So several years ago, FDA recognized that usability has its own particular types of risks associated with them. So while it certainly relates to safety risk, there's some nuanced differences that cause you to think about it a little differently. The same is true with cybersecurity, and they're all interrelated. So I'll give you one example. When it comes to standard 14971 type of risk analysis, you're looking at probability and severity of harm, right? So you're
Mhm.
looking at kind of a risk scoring. We're looking at what's the probability that this sequence of events will happen, and the thing that it results in, what's the severity of that harm. In cybersecurity, you're looking more at exploitability rather than probability and then severity. And the reason is that in kind of classic safety risk analysis, you're looking at things where there's not like an intentional threat actor, somebody who's intentionally trying to harm somebody. It's more like, hey, what happens if a person accidentally touches a live wire and gets electrocuted, right? But it's different in cybersecurity because it's almost like saying, what happens if somebody is purposefully grabbing the live wire and trying to press it against the patient? It's so it's a
Mhm.
different mentality. In cybersecurity, you've got threat actors, you've got
Got you.
bad players who are trying to do stuff. So the question you're asking yourself is not around probabilities. How difficult is it going to be for a threat actor to exploit this vulnerability? Now, the tie-in between cybersecurity risk analysis and standard safety risk analysis largely has to do with the controls that you put in place for cybersecurity. And all three of them tie in: safety, usability, cybersecurity. Because as you start adding controls to the system to make it more secure, you
Mhm.
want to be careful that those controls don't then cause risks associated with safety or with usability. If you have a medical device where for cybersecurity risk mitigation, you log the patient out every 10 minutes and ask them to re-enter their credentials, you might imagine how in an operating room that can have detrimental effects to safety.
Yes.
Those are the trade-offs that you have to think through.
Wonderful. So there is a handshake, right? There is a handshake between security, cybersecurity risk assessments, and safety risk assessments. It's not like they are two separate things. They might require different levels of expertise and experiences, different questions, different approaches. But at the end of the day, they should be connected to each other, and they should be a handshake back and forth, because same argument could be applied to safety risk management and the controls that we are putting there, that if it compromises security and cybersecurity, we have to kind of make sure we work through that. So in this regard, Jose, can you share any best practices with us, how to actually do this, how to actually do it in an integrated way? Because unlikely that one or two people will have knowledge of everything. It'll have to be a collaborative effort. So how best to do that?
Yeah, I mean, almost anything related to product development, collaboration is key, right? Oftentimes you have it between clinical people and engineers and marketing and all that kind of stuff. And, in risk management for products that have software. And by the way, I'll make this quick point because I don't think I've made it yet, and it's important. People sometimes think that they only have to worry about cybersecurity if their device is cloud connected or if
Mhm.
it's like got wireless communications. And that's not true. FDA explicitly states in their 2023 guidance document that pretty much your decision tree is simple. Does your device have software? If it does,
Mhm.
cybersecurity applies, because there's ways for threat actors to attack the device that don't require wireless communications and such. Once you're doing that type of analysis, you want to have other people involved. I mean, the example that I just gave you would be a good one, where as you're thinking through the cybersecurity controls, you want to then have somebody in the room who says, hey, wait a minute, what's the impact of that on usability? Or
Mhm.
what's the impact of that on regular safety? One of the key documents people might want to look at if they're interested in learning more about cybersecurity is the ANSI AMI 6 risk management what is it, security risk management process, I think it's called.
Mm.
And it has a really nice diagram that ties in sort of your security risk management with your standard 14971 risk management, and evaluating how security risk controls might impact, just normal safety, and then vice versa, how risk controls on the safety side might impact security types of vulnerability. So yeah, there's definitely a nice tie between them.
That's a great resource. And also in ISO TR 24971, I believe there is an annex which also talks about security risk management in the context of 14971. To my simple mind, it seems like if a cybersecurity vulnerability has been successfully exploited, I would treat that as potentially a trigger event or an initial event that could cascade into another sequence of events and leading to hazardous situations. So in my mind, I see a absolute connectivity to the extent that the outcome of a successful exploitation of a cybersecurity vulnerability could be treated as, in my mind, almost like an initial event. Is that conceptually, am I on the right track or am I missing something?
No, absolutely. I mean, this all ties in. So this is not something that should live external to your standard design controls and risk management process. They're completely intertwined. So as an example, as your design inputs, your software requirement specifications, I mentioned earlier, you typically start with the requirements that are related to how do I build the thing that does the thing that we're trying to do. But then as you do your normal safety risk management, and you have some controls, those should feed right back into your requirements, right? Because you should be verifying that control that you put in place is effective. Yeah. The same thing happens with security. So as you're thinking through, those exploits that could result in a sequence of events that results in harm, those should be feeding back into your standard risk analysis, and they should be feeding back in to your design inputs documentation, because it'll be part of your software verification. There's really, if we talk about verification now for a minute, software verification, right, as you might think about it, from design controls and from 62304, is to verify that your design outputs meet your design inputs, or your the final thing that you built does what you said it was going to do in your requirement specification. You still need to do that. Those security controls that you put in place that are supposed to do something, you still have to verify those, that it does what you're supposed to do, right? But then on top of that, for security, you're going to want to do two other types of testing. There's more than that, but there's two big ones that happen closer to the end. One of them is fuzz testing. So it's putting in all kinds of inputs that the system is not expecting. So as an example, if there's a field where you're supposed to put in your name, what happens if you put in numbers or exclamation marks? If it's supposed to be up to 20 characters, what happens if you put in 21? If it's expecting negative numbers, what happens if you put in positive numbers? So it's like, what are all these various inputs that you can put into the system that can cause just standard normal bugs, problems, but also maybe security vulnerabilities? So that's one thing. And the other one is penetration testing. So that's the big one that you hear about a lot in cybersecurity. And that's, essentially putting on the hat of a hacker. It's like, how can I break into this system and cause harm? And so, all those things are related. Cybersecurity has just some nuanced things that if you're not in that world, you may not be thinking about. And so I think ultimately what FDA is trying to do is get you to think about these things, make sure
Got you. So it's very interesting conversation, and I know we can go quite deep into this. I just wanted to kind of share one thought I had in mind here, is that all this type of a conversation should happen early when we are doing hazard analysis, because at the end of the day, we need to identify what kind of hazards might be relevant or activated if a cybersecurity vulnerability were to be successfully exploited. And that's where I think we can begin to connect these two processes at a high level, and then through our testing at a deeper level. So I think that's it's a very good way to look at these two activities, not as separate activities, but connected together. And your point is a valid one, that FDA is highlighting it because they want us to focus on it, but not because they want us to exclude other considerations, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. What a fascinating conversation, guys. And I know time flies. We could talk a whole lot about this topic. And in future conversations, we will address this theme once again. So, Jose, I want to give you a couple of minutes to process your thoughts and just find out, share with us 2 or 3 key takeaway points based on our conversation today that we can share. In the meantime, guys, I want to share with you a couple of announcements. First, next week, I'm going to Amsterdam to attend the International Conference on Medical Device Safety Risk Management. This is going to be a great event. I'm giving a presentation on benefit risk and also doing a workshop on connecting FMEAs with your risk assessments. So I'm really looking forward to it. I will be sharing updates from my conversations with people, what I learned there. Many different speakers are going to be there. We have a lot of fun. So keep an eye on my LinkedIn feed. You will see a lot of updates from me. The second, again, is to remind you that I have a post market safety surveillance workshop that I offer. And the next session is going to be in early May. So we are going to talk about a lot of different things, but from a very practical point of view, how to analyze data to detect signals early before they become a trend, how to understand the regulatory requirements, how to set up a system that works for you efficiently. So the registration is now open in the early May session. Reach out to me if you're interested. And by the weekend, this weekend, you have a special deal if you sign up. I'm giving 20% off if you sign up before Sunday. So reach out if you're interested. With that, Jose, the floor is yours. Please share any key takeaway points we can take from today.
Sure. Yeah. I'll make two kind of overarching points. The first is that if you don't feel like you've got expertise in these areas, both of them, software development, all the regulations, guidance documents, and standards around them, or cybersecurity, I strongly recommend you bring on experts early. The point you made, Naveen, is a good one. The longer you wait, the harder it's going to be, and the more kind of retroactive the solution, the more painful it's going to be, and the less effective. So try to start early and try to do it with people who really understand these things. There's a lot to learn. There's 24 different guidance documents related to, or at least, and many standards. So just make sure that somebody on the team, whether it's in-house or through consultants and partners, really understand all of that and try to start early would be my two pieces of advice to companies that are relatively new to the space.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jose. What a wonderful conversation we had today. Guys, thank you for joining once again. You show up week after week, and that is really the fuel that drives this engine. Let's Talk Risk is about you, about us. It's not about me. And it's all about conversations. So I look forward to connecting with you once again in a couple of weeks after I return from this conference. In the meantime, please continue to reach out to each other, to me. Jose is a great resource. If you have questions, anything you want to learn more about, please make good use of this opportunity. Jose, thanks again. Once again, I really appreciated your insights and the time you have given to us so generously. I wish you all the best in your new venture with CyberMed. I know you're going to be helping out a lot of companies, and look forward to staying in touch with you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Naveen.
All right. Take care, guys.